What's going on, everybody? Lucas Wenzel here for the Fantasy Pros. Welcome back into the channel. Today we're going to be talking about 10 players on the waiver wire I'm looking to stash this weekend before week 4 is fully underway. But before we do, if you want your chance at winning a signed Jalen Waddle Miami Dolphins jersey, courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now and comment below on this video. That's it. That's all you need to do. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize when we announce it. All right, let's dive in. This first player might quite literally be the only wide receiver option for his team right now, and that's Richie James of the New York Giants, who's rostered in 17% of leagues. Wan'Dale Robinson and Kadarius Toney both haven't been practicing this week. This new coaching staff doesn't appear to be fans of Kenny Golladay, despite all the money the team is paying him, and Sterling Shepard is now out for the season. Richie James is the next man up in New York. He's seen 70% of the team's snaps in 2 out of 3 games this year. He's seen 5 targets in every game. He scored double-digit fantasy points in 2 out of 3 games. It's worth stashing him to see how the Giants utilize him until they get the likes of Wan'Dale Robinson or Kadarius Toney back healthy. I guarantee this next player is likely still on the waiver wire in your league because he's currently available in 98% of leagues. That player is Craig Reynolds of the Detroit Lions. And if your reaction is, who? I get it. But here's the thing. The Lions will be without DeAndre Swift this week, opening up the door for Craig Reynolds to play a complimentary role alongside Jamal Williams. He gets a great matchup against Seattle, and by no means am I saying he'll outperform Jamal Williams, but if Reynolds stumbles into the end zone this week, it wouldn't surprise me. Let's move on to a guy who hasn't actually played a down of NFL football yet this year, Michael Gallup. Yes, he's coming off of an ACL injury, and yes, I don't expect him to be as dominant. That all being said, Noah Brown has been a serviceable option for fantasy teams in a crunch, scoring double-digit points in every game this year en route to being a top 25 fantasy wide receiver. Back when Gallup was the wide receiver 2 for this Cowboys offense in 2019, we saw him finish as a top 25 wide receiver with 1,100 yards. Again, likely won't be that productive or explosive upon his return, but the tea leaves showed that he could find fantasy relevance soon should he return to action in week 4. Next up is a guy who I believe will pay dividends in the next 7 to 8 weeks if you stash him right now. It's Isaiah McKenzie of the Buffalo Bills. He was somewhat of a trendy late round sleeper this offseason, and now is the perfect time to stash him. The initial concern is that McKenzie is sharing slot reps with teammate Jamison Crowder, but he's out-targeted him 15-9 thus far and has tripled his fantasy points. Looking at his schedule coming up as well, he gets the Ravens, Steelers, Chiefs, Packers, Jets, Vikings, Browns, and Lions. 7 of those 8 teams are currently top 15 in fantasy points allowed to slot wide receivers this year, and 6 of the 8 are top 12. Add in that McKenzie is also 20th in fantasy points per route run and 9th in fantasy points per target. This is the perfect time to stash him if he's still available on the waiver wire in your league. Next up, we have Eno Benjamin, running back for the Arizona Cardinals, who's rostered in 10% of leagues. James Conner is the lead back for the Cardinals, but Eno is carving himself out a mini Chase Edmonds role of sorts. Amongst running backs, Eno was currently 15th in targets, 18th in receiving yards, and 19th in receptions. He's been incredibly efficient with his touches as well, averaging 7.4 yards per reception and 5.4 yards per touch, both of which are 14th amongst running backs. If Eno could squeeze away even 1 touchdown from James Conner, his 9 points in week 1 turns into 15, 8 points in week 2 turns into 14. Receiving work for running backs is invaluable in fantasy football, and Eno Benjamin has it. This next player finished as the wide receiver 15 in week 3 with 18.3 fantasy points, and that's KJ Osborn of the Minnesota Vikings. He's been on the field a solid amount for this team, seeing at least 75% of the snaps the past 2 weeks, and he's running a good amount of routes too. 93 on the season, which is top 35 amongst wide receivers. The Vikings play the Saints this week, who have been fairly good against wide receivers this year, but I'm expecting Marshawn Lattimore to keep Justin Jefferson in check, thus opening more opportunities for Kirk Cousins to spread the ball around more. Next up is Robert Tonyan, tight end for the Green Bay Packers, who's rostered in 30% of leagues. We saw his best game of the season thus far in week 3, where he had 6 receptions for 37 yards, which doesn't seem like a great performance. But in the land of fantasy football tight ends, that was good enough to be the tight end 15 on the week. I'm not trying to sell you on his week 3 finish, but I do think there's room for Tonyan's role to continue expanding. Each week this year, he's seen his snap percentage rise, 36% in week 1, 40% in week 2, and 58% in week 3. In an Aaron Rodgers offense that needs more weapons to step up in the coming weeks, we could see a slight mini resurgence of 2020 Robert Tonyan. That's worth stashing. We have a pretty small sample size of this next guy, but it's time to stash him. Alec Pierce, wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts, is rostered in only 4% of leagues. His first stat line as a pro was 3 receptions on 5 targets for 61 yards against the Chiefs in week 3. Nothing super flashy, but he was clearly the complementary wide receiver to Michael Pittman, which should have value in this offense with Matt Ryan. He's got a great stretch of games coming up as well. He gets Tennessee twice, who have allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year, the Jaguars, and the Commanders as well. If Paris Campbell and Ashton Dulin can't get it done, the Colts should be hopeful that Alec Pierce can. We've already talked about one Reynolds in this list, why not add another? Josh Reynolds of the Detroit Lions is next. He scored 12.8 and 15.6 fantasy points in each of his past 2 games, and he's played at least 72% of the snaps in every game this season. He's not a massive big play threat, but his average depth of target is 14.6 yards, which is 10th in the league, and he's currently 18th in deep targets. Josh Reynolds isn't a sexy name to add by any stretch of the imagination, but he's been productive thus far and gets a fairly decent matchup with Seattle this weekend. Lastly, we have a running back who's got a great matchup this week, and that's Sony Michel of the Los Angeles Chargers. He's been a nuisance to Austin Eckler's workload this year and has actually been the more efficient runner, albeit on less attempts. The big thing for Sony this week, though, is that he gets a prime matchup with the Houston Texans, who have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs this year and the most rushing yards. Another thing to keep in mind that might be slightly telling, Sony Michel and Austin Eckler have split rushing attempts in the red zone so far this year. So if there's a week for Sony to spell Austin Eckler of a touchdown, it might be this week against the Texans. Probably worth stashing him. All right, y'all, before I get out of here, remember, if you want your chance at winning a signed Jalen Waddle Miami Dolphins jersey, courtesy of our friends at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now and comment below on this video. Maybe you agree with something I said, maybe you disagree, but that's all you need to do. We'll be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and claim your prize when we announce it.
Thanks for tuning in to the FantasyPros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos. And while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.